The ego always overestimates itself. That is the specific, predictable, entirely avoidable quality of the kind of ego that produces the behavior I am about to describe. The specific, inflated, disconnected from accurate self-assessment quality of someone who has mistaken their own importance to another person for a permanent condition rather than a revocable one, who has been operating from the assumption that whatever access they had to you, whatever position they held in your life, whatever specific particular quality of your attention and your care and your investment was flowing in their direction, would continue to flow regardless of how they behaved. They miscalculated, not in a way that required sophisticated analysis to see coming, in the way that is entirely visible in retrospect and that has a quality of inevitability to it that makes the people watching from the outside ask the question, the title names, why did they do this to you? I want to begin with what happened, because the destroyed ego requires a context, and the context is the answer to the question everyone is asking. They got comfortable, not in the good way, in the specific, slightly dangerous way that people get comfortable when they have been in a position of receiving the particular quality of what you offer without having had to earn it recently. When the investment of care and consistency and genuine presence that you bring to the people you bring it to has been so steady and so reliable that the person receiving it has stopped registering it as something with a value that requires reciprocation, has started treating it as a given. And things that are treated as givens begin to be treated as entitlements. And entitlements produce a specific corrosive quality of behavior, the behavior of someone who has decided that what they receive is owed rather than offered, that the effort of being good enough to receive it has long since been discharged, and that the receiving can now continue without the corresponding effort of being worth receiving. They treated you as a given, and then they did something with that treatment that crossed a line. Let me describe the ignorant quality of the ego specifically, because ignorant is the word the title uses, and it is the most precise word available for what this ego was operating from. Ignorant of what you actually are, not uninformed in the sense of lacking factual information, ignorant in the specific, willful, adjacent sense of someone who had access to the information and chose not to integrate it, who had been in your presence long enough to understand who they were dealing with, but who had allowed the comfort of the entitlement to override the accurate assessment of the specific, non-ordinary quality of what they had access to. They were ignorant of your value, not because your value was hidden, because the ignorance was a choice that was made easier by the fact that you were so consistently there, so consistently giving what you gave, so consistently being what you are, that the ignorance did not have to work hard to maintain itself against the evidence. The evidence was you, right there, consistently. And consistently present things become easy to underestimate. I want to speak to what the destroying of the ego actually looks like, because destroying sounds dramatic, and the reality of it is more specific and more interesting than dramatic. It is not a confrontation, not a dramatic scene in which you delivered a speech or made a declaration or engineered a moment of visible dominance, not the specific theatrical quality of a power reversal that produces a clear, observable win, not even a moment that was necessarily recognizable as the moment in the instant of its occurrence. It is the leaving or the changing or the stopping Whatever the specific form your action or non-action took in the moment when you finally removed or reduced or simply declined to extend further the specific thing that was the source of what they were taking for granted, the removing is what destroys the ignorant ego. Because the ignorant ego was built on the assumption of your continued presence and your continued investment and your continued willingness to give what you had been giving. And when the assumption proves incorrect, when the thing that was treated as a given turns out to have been genuinely contingent on their behavior toward you, the entire architecture of the ego that was built on that assumption collapses. Not with drama, with the specific, quiet, impossible to argue with quality of reality asserting itself over an assumption. The removing is what destroys the ignorant ego. Because the ignorant ego was built on the assumption of your continued presence and your continued investment and your continued willingness to give what you had been giving. And when the assumption proves incorrect, when the thing that was treated as a given turns out to have been genuinely contingent on their behavior toward you, the entire architecture of the ego that was built on that assumption collapses. Not with drama, with the specific, quiet, impossible to argue with quality of reality asserting itself over an assumption. I want to describe what that collapse looks and feels like, because the destroyed ego does not fall apart all at once. It falls apart in stages that have their own texture. The first stage is confusion, the specific quality of someone who encountered an unexpected result from an action they expected to produce a different result, who had, consciously or unconsciously, been operating from the assumption that the same actions would continue to produce the same returns, who is now confronting evidence that the assumption was wrong without yet fully understanding why. The second stage is the reaching, the specific, slightly desperate quality of someone who is trying to restore what they lost through the application of something they did not apply before, attention that was absent before, acknowledgement that was absent before, the specific, slightly too late quality of someone who has discovered the value of something at the exact moment they have lost access to it, and who is attempting to recover the access through the demonstration of the understanding they should have had before. The third stage is the reckoning, the specific, quiet, cannot be argued with quality of someone who has moved past the confusion and the reaching, and who is sitting with the plain, simple, entirely their own responsibility, reality of what they lost and why, of what their choices produced, of what they did not see while they had access to it, that they can see clearly now that they do not. This person is somewhere in those stages. I want to speak to what they experienced in the moment of the collapse. Something that had been invisible became visible. The specific, retroactive quality of understanding only after a thing is gone what it actually was while it was present, of the worth of what you were offering becoming clear at the exact moment that the offering stopped, of the specific daily continuous quality of what they had been receiving being understood for the first time through the evidence of its absence. This is the specific, reliable, entirely predictable consequence of losing something you took for granted. You understand its value the moment you no longer have it. The ignorant ego is educated by the loss, not in a way that immediately produces wisdom or gratitude or any of the more elevated responses to loss. First, in the more basic, more physical way, in the specific quality of reaching for something that is no longer there, of expecting a thing to be available and finding it is not. of running the ordinary operations of a life that had been organized around having access to your care and your presence, and discovering in the running of those operations that the results are different now, consistently different, in the direction of worse. That consistency is the education. Let me speak to why so many people are asking the question. Because the title says, so many ask why they did this to you, and the manyness of it is worth examining. You are not navigating this alone. There are people in your world, or people adjacent to your world, who have been watching, who had context for the relationship, who understood from whatever proximity they had to both of you and to what existed between you, enough to have formed an accurate picture of the situation, and who, when the thing happened that prompted this reading, had a specific, immediate, this makes no sense quality of response. The response was not simply sympathy, it was bewilderment. The specific, genuine quality of people who cannot reconcile what happened with what they knew about the situation, who understood enough about what you are and what you were offering and what the quality of your investment was to find the behavior of this person genuinely inexplicable from the outside. Why would someone do that to you? That is the question. And the question reveals something important. It reveals that the people watching this from the outside could see what the person inside the relationship did not see, could see the value of what was there clearly enough that it's being disregarded and ultimately damaged by the behavior of the person on the other side, produced genuine bewilderment. The bewilderment is a compliment, a specific, secondhand, comes from others, accurate assessment of what you are kind of compliment. The bewilderment is a compliment, a specific, secondhand, comes from others, accurate assessment of what you are kind of compliment. I want to give this one more dimension because I think it is the most personally validating piece of this reading. The people asking why are asking from a position of having seen what was there, not through your advocacy for yourself, not because you told them what you were offering or what you deserved or what the situation should have been, through their own direct observation of who you are and how you operate and what the quality of your investment in relationships looks like from the outside. They form their own assessment. And their assessment produced a specific, genuine respect for what you bring to the people you bring it to, a specific, genuine sense of the value of what you were giving in that situation. And from that assessment and that sense came the specific, bewildered question of why anyone who had access to what you were offering would choose to behave in a way that risked losing it. The question is rhetorical, actually, because the people asking it are not confused about why. They understand the why. They are expressing, through the form of a question, their assessment of the specific fundamental miscalculation that the behavior represented. Their sense that anyone with an accurate understanding of what they had would not have done what was done. Anyone with an accurate understanding, the ego was ignorant. The ignorance was the miscalculation. And the people around you saw both the value and the ignorance clearly from outside, what the person inside was too close to see. Tell me in the comments if you have been hearing this question from the people around you. If the bewilderment I am describing is something you have encountered in the responses of people who knew about the situation. If their question has been part of your own process of understanding what happened and why, I want to know where you are with this. I want to speak to the answer to the question because so many are asking why, and they deserve an honest answer. The why is not complicated. The behavior that prompted the question came from the specific, uncomfortable, ultimately self-defeating place of someone operating from a limited understanding of what they had, who could not accurately assess the value of what they were receiving, because accurate assessment requires a certain quality of humility and self-awareness and the willingness to acknowledge dependency that the ignorant ego was not equipped to produce. The ignorant ego does not acknowledge dependency. It converts dependency into entitlement. What was the specific, generous, not guaranteed quality of your care became, in their model of the situation, simply what was owed. What required appreciation became invisible precisely because it was consistently present. What deserved reciprocation began to be treated as a resource to be extracted rather than an investment to be honored. That is the why, not malice, not a calculated decision to harm. The specific, obtuse, ultimately self-destructive quality of someone who did not understand what they had until they demonstrated through their own behavior that they did not deserve to keep it. I want to speak to something about what this situation has revealed about you, because this reading is not only about what happened, it is about what the happening has made visible. Your limits are real. This is the specific, important, worth naming clearly thing that the situation has demonstrated. Not simply that you have limits, which everyone does, but that your limits are real in the specific sense of being actual rather than theoretical, of being the kind that produce consequences when crossed rather than the kind that are announced but not enforced, of being the kind that mean something. You reached the limit, and the reaching produced the action that destroyed the ignorant ego, not through anger, not through the specific reactive quality of someone who responds to being treated badly by trying to produce a particular effect in the person who treated them badly, through the specific clean quality of someone who simply stopped, who reached the point where the continuation of what was being given required more than the situation was worth, and who made the clear, unambiguous, no drama decision to stop continuing. The stopping was the action. The action was the power, and the power was the destroying, and the power was the destroying. I want to add something to this because I think it is the most important piece for how you understand what you did. What you did required something, not anger, not a decision made in a particular emotional state that might be second-guessed later. The specific, grounded, clear-eyed quality of someone who reached the point of understanding that the equation was not balancing and who made the only rational, self-respecting decision available when an equation does not balance. The decision to stop subsidizing the imbalance, the stopping, was not easy. Even when the stopping is clearly the right thing, there is a specific, real, emotional weight to it, to the releasing of something that was genuinely important to you, to the accepting that what you were giving was not being met at the level it deserved, to the decision to let go of the specific hope that the situation would correct itself if you simply continued to give. That hope was the thing you let go of, not the person, not the investment of everything that preceded this moment. The hope that the continuing would eventually produce a different result than it had been producing, and the letting go of the hope was the most powerful thing you did. More powerful than any confrontation could have been, because the confrontation would have given them something to push against. The letting go gave them only the absence of what they had undervalued. And absence in this context, is the most precise possible form of feedback. Let me speak to where things stand now. Because the ignorant ego has been destroyed and the question has been asked, and the context of this reading exists in the aftermath of all of that, something has shifted in them, in how they are relating to the reality of what happened and what it cost them. Not a comfortable shift. The specific grinding daily evidence quality of someone who is living inside the consequences of their own choices and who cannot, because the consequences are real and present, escape the understanding that their choices produced them. They are in the education now, not the pleasant kind, the specific, lasting kind that comes from encountering the real cost of something you undervalued. That produces a clarity about what was actually there that could not have been produced by any amount of telling. That has to be arrived at through the direct experience of the absence of what was taken for granted. That education is producing something. What it is producing and whether it produces anything that is relevant to your life going forward is something that time will answer. But the producing is happening in real time, in the daily, unavoidable, there is no escaping this quality of someone who is now understanding through its absence what your presence actually was. I want to say one final thing before we close. You did not do anything wrong. The question so many are asking, why did they do this to you, is the right question directed at the right person. The behavior that prompted the question came from their side, from their choices, from the specific ignorant ego quality of how they had been operating. The destroying of the ego was not something you engineered or planned or executed for effect. It was the natural, clean, completely appropriate consequence of someone withdrawing what they had been generously giving when the giving was no longer being met with the minimum standard of being treated as the genuine gift it was. What you gave was a gift. The gift was not honored. You stopped giving it. That is not something that requires any explanation or justification or apology. That is simply what people who understand their own value do. And you, Virgo, understand yours. Even when it takes someone else's failure to recognize it, to make the understanding fully visible, it is visible now to you, to the many who are asking the question. And to them, finally,